Story 1. Anonymous. It was one of those rare nights when I had the apartment all to myself. My roommate had gone to visit his parents for the weekend, leaving me alone in our shared place. I had a night off work, and since I'm a bit of a night owl, I was looking forward to some quiet relaxation. I kicked back on the couch, cracked open a cold beer, and turned on the TV. The house was quiet, and the only noise was the occasional sound of the refrigerator humming. It was around midnight when I first heard it. A faint thump from above. My initial reaction was to brush it off. Maybe it was just the house settling or the creak of an old pipe. I went back to watching TV, but the sound repeated. It was soft, almost like a muffled thump, and I couldn't quite place it. I turned the TV volume down to listen more closely, but the sound had stopped. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The noise was so subtle that it almost seemed like my imagination was playing tricks on me. I convinced myself that it was nothing to worry about. I opened the mini fridge next to the couch, grabbed another beer, and took a few sips. Just as I was about to unmute the TV and get back to my show, the sound came again. This time, it was louder and more distinct. It was as if someone was walking around directly above me. My heart skipped a beat. My roommate's room was upstairs, and he had left that morning. It couldn't be him. I got up from the couch, feeling uneasy. I walked over to the stairs and stood at the bottom, listening. The thump was now accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps, moving slowly. It was unsettling to hear them so clearly. I called out my roommate's name, even though I knew it was futile. There was no response. I took a deep breath and started up the stairs, feeling a knot in my stomach. I turned on the hallway light, which illuminated the upstairs but revealed nothing out of the ordinary. The door to my roommate's room was open, a detail that struck me as odd. I had been sure I'd closed it before he left. I walked over to the room and peeked inside. Everything looked just as it had before he left, neat and undisturbed. I checked every room upstairs, but found nothing unusual. The feeling of dread was palpable, and my nerves were frayed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I spent the rest of the night on high alert, unable to relax. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, and I stayed awake, listening for any more noises. When my roommate returned, he assured me that everything was fine and that there was no reason to worry. But I couldn't shake the eerie feeling of that night. To this day, I still wonder if someone had managed to enter the house unnoticed or if it was simply a figment of my imagination. Whatever it was, it left me unsettled and cautious in my own home. Story 2. Anonymous. I had decided to take a quick camping trip in Utah, a short getaway from my usual routine. The plan was simple: hike up to a small lake and spend the night there. I arrived in the early afternoon, and to my surprise, the place was more crowded than expected. Two groups were already set up by the lake, enjoying the last bit of daylight. It was a bit busier than I had anticipated, but I didn't mind. By 5 p.m., the other groups packed up and left, leaving me alone by the lake. I took advantage of the solitude and changed into my swimsuit. I jumped into the cool water and swam for a while, relishing the peaceful surroundings. But as the sun began to set, I noticed something unsettling. A man was standing just past the edge of the forest, beyond the beach area. He was too far away for me to make out details, but he was clearly watching me. When our eyes met, he quickly turned and disappeared further into the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the sense of unease lingered. I hurried out of the lake, dried off, and packed up my things. I kept an eye on the forest, but I didn't see the man again. After cooking a small meal, I settled into my tent for the night, hoping that whatever I had seen was just a figment of my imagination. Around midnight, I woke up feeling anxious. The tent was pitch black, and I could hear the faint sounds of rain and insects outside. I lay there, trying to calm my racing thoughts, when I noticed something terrifying. The zipper of the tent was slightly open. Through the gap, I saw a pair of eyes staring directly at me. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my bear spray and sprayed it towards the opening. The man outside yelled and fled, his footsteps echoing in the distance. I scrambled out of my tent, my pocket knife in hand, but there was no sign of him. I packed up quickly, using my GPS to navigate away from the site, and drove home as fast as I could. When I reported the incident to the police, they found no trace of the man. He had disappeared without a trace. The experience left me shaken, and I haven't been camping since. The image of those eyes still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Story 3. BK. I've worked at a local gas station for several years, handling everything from customer service to closing up at night. My shift usually starts at 8 p.m. and ends at 12:30 a.m. During the late hours, it's typically quiet, especially after 11 p.m. when the other workers leave. I'd spend the time stocking shelves and tidying up, waiting for the clock to tick down. On a particular Thursday night, things were uneventful until around 1 a.m., when a car pulled into the parking lot. It was odd to see someone arrive at this hour, and even stranger that the car didn't move. I glanced outside, expecting them to come in, but minutes passed and nothing happened. The car's engine was off, and no one got out. I tried to peer through the reflections on the glass doors, but I couldn't make out any details. I shrugged it off and continued with my tasks. About 20 minutes later, I glanced up and was startled to see a man standing in one of the aisles, staring directly at me. He was scruffy, with a dark jacket that looked out of place. I was startled because I hadn't heard him come in. He seemed to be studying me intently, which made me uncomfortable. Without a word, he suddenly turned and bolted toward the front door, running out of the store. I rushed to the door to see where he went, but he had already disappeared down the road. Reviewing the security footage, I saw the man walk up to the back of the store. The cameras couldn't cover that area, but the footage clearly showed him loitering for about 15 minutes before appearing in the store. The police were called, and they discovered the car he arrived in was stolen, but the man's identity and intentions remained a mystery. It was clear he had something planned, but I was fortunate he didn't act on it. Story 4. Anonymous. When I was 13, summer break had just started, and I was spending the day at home. It was rainy outside, so I stayed indoors, mostly playing video games on my PS3 or watching TV. My parents weren't home, my dad was working late, and my mom's nursing shifts were unpredictable. I was alone in the house, which was both exciting and a little lonely. Around 7 p.m., I decided to make myself a snack in the kitchen. While I was rummaging through the cupboards, I heard a knock on the front door. Startled, I hesitated before approaching. The knocking persisted, and I reluctantly went to check. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a police officer standing outside, drenched from the rain. He was alone, with no police car visible. I opened the door, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. The officer asked for my name and claimed he needed to search the house. There was something off about him. His uniform was untidy, and his teeth were yellowed and rotting. His overall appearance was disheveled, which struck me as odd for a police officer. The officer's demeanor and appearance made me uneasy. There was no police car in sight, and his request seemed unusual. I tried to convince myself that it was a prank or a mistake. I quickly slammed the door shut and locked it. I could hear him banging on the door, trying to force his way in. Panicking, I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. The real police arrived swiftly and apprehended the man. It turned out he wasn't a real officer but an imposter with intentions of kidnapping me. My parents were horrified when they heard the details. I'm incredibly thankful that I didn't let him inside and that the police arrived in time to prevent a terrible situation. Story 5. Leo G. I'm Leo, and I work the night shift at a small-town pizza shop. My duties include making pizzas, handling orders, and closing up the store. We close at 12:30 a.m., but after 11 p.m., I'm usually alone. The late hours are quiet, and most nights pass without incident. One Thursday night, as I was finishing up cleaning, I noticed someone walking by the large front windows. They glanced in and seemed to notice me. It was fairly common for people to look inside as they passed by, so I didn't think much of it. But when the same person walked by again a few minutes later and looked in again, it struck me as unusual. I decided to keep an eye on the person. They were standing across the street, seemingly just staring at the building. The person wore dark clothing and a hat, making it difficult to discern their face. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I called my manager, who said they would notify the police. However, since nothing had happened yet, it wasn't a priority for them. I watched the person from the safety of the shop, feeling increasingly uneasy. Eventually, they walked off, but the experience had already unsettled me. When I was ready to leave, I noticed the same person sitting on the curb outside the shop. My anxiety spiked, and I decided to use the back exit. I locked the door behind me, hurried to my car, and drove home. The person was nowhere to be seen by the time I left, but the encounter left me feeling profoundly uneasy. Later, my manager followed up with the police. They didn't find anything unusual, but the incident made me more cautious. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, and it left me on edge every time I worked late shifts.